Hello, my name is Justin Pritchard, and today I want to spend some time talking about labor-based grading practices, specifically thinking about refocusing instruction around student learning. And I think that's really what labor-based grading creates space to do. And that's think about what our goals are and what the learning outcomes are for students in our classroom. So many times our practice, our craft of teaching centers around this necessity to assess and to deliver that assessment to students as a way to their progress, indicate their success. And we know that grades act as a barrier, frequently act as a barrier. Um, Even though grades are everywhere and grades have been around forever, they've proven to be an inadequate tool. Specifically, it's really hard to point to a paper that receives an 88 and talk about it as being markedly different than a paper that's an 83. And what does that mean for the student in terms of growth potential? And is the student even going to focus on growth potential once they reach kind of a preconceived goal in the grading landscape? The reality is that grades tend to reduce students' interest in the learning process, right? That students are more interested in achieving the grade than learning the skill. They reduce students' preference for challenging tasks. And so they'll choose tasks that are more attainable or that don't stretch them because they value that grade, because they know that that grade is a signifier and is a ticket in many ways to other things. And that grades tend to reduce the quality of students' thinking, that good enough is in fact good enough. And so when we think about grades, when we think about education, we think about it in terms of learning outcomes for students. We think about it in terms of mastering skill sets. And that a student who slides by and comes close to completing a task, or maybe completes the task to the lowest possible standards consistently, is denied the opportunity to grow in a way that's really meaningful. And similarly, a student who is able to easily meet the standards, and we're going to talk about discourse communities, we're going to talk about the way in which privilege can influence students' ability to meet standards. But a student who can consistently meet standards with little effort is never really asked to extend themselves beyond their current capability, beyond their current state. And so when we think about grades in that way, what we really want students to do is master tasks. We want them to be able to master a skill set. We want them to be able to function in a specific environment. We want them to be able to think like writers and understand audience. We want them to understand purpose and rhetorical principles. We want them to become better speakers, better writers, better readers, better listeners, right? Those are our goals for our students in our classroom. But before we move into more specifics about labor-based grading, I think it's important to underscore what labor-based grading isn't. And labor-based grading is not extra credit. And so a lot of times people will say, well, yeah, I provide opportunities for students to achieve extra credit. I provide opportunities for students to move beyond the content of the course, and so they can do more work and earn a better grade. But labor that goes beyond the task itself deprioritizes in many ways. And it can also underscore or maybe emphasize the ways in which students can circumvent the tasks that we've decided are most important for their development in the course. Labor-based grading is also not unlimited revisions. And for a long time, I thought, well, I teach a brand of labor-based grading because I allow my students to revise a paper as many times as they want until they earn the grade that they want. And even though that's focused on labor, those unlimited revisions consistently send the message if a student isn't able to move their grade forward with their effort, it sends the message that effort, that labor was useless, or that labor wasn't productive or wasn't valuable. And it's still, unlimited revisions still looks at the instructor as being the primary assessor of student success. Labor-based grading is certainly not lowered expectations. As a matter of fact, hopefully, if I do my job here, you'll see how labor-based grading can actually raise expectations and raise student awareness about the process of writing, or the process that you need to go through, and not just simply look at a product. And it is not decreased academic rigor. A lot of times when we track, students can earn a contracted grade, which we're going to discuss in a few moments, that somehow that because we're not assigning a grade to their work, that it's not as rigorous. But students still need to meet the minimum standards for the assignment in order to achieve that contracted grade. And so we're going to get to that in a moment. So it's not decreased academic rigor. A labor-based grading model can be as rigorous, can be as challenging, and can have as high expectations, if not higher, than a traditional assessment model. So what is labor-based grading? It prioritizes the amount of time and energy that a student exerts to meet course expectations rather than a judgment about the product of that labor. So it's about the process. It's about the things that you need to do in order to become a good writer, and not just the paper at the end. It also de-emphasizes the role as the instructor of judge or master of course content. That students know that if they meet the expectations that are laid out in the assignment outline, that they're going to receive credit for the course. And if they exceed that content, and if they do the additional labor required, that they can earn points towards a grade beyond the contracted grade. So the instructor is there to help the student meet those standards, not serve as a gatekeeper to students who haven't yet met those standards. And I think that that's a nuance, but I think it's an important one to articulate. That if a student sees you as somebody who can help them to complete their labor more efficiently, they're going to lean on you differently. They're going to interact with you differently than if you're the person who's going to be assessing the labor that they've done. One's proactive, one's reactive, right? And so when we begin thinking about labor-based grading in those terms, there's a lot of possibilities that begin to emerge. And in order to start labor-based grading, it's important to think about a successful student. When you think about a student that can be successful in your classroom, what are the types of things that student does? So in a composition classroom, in a writing classroom, a student who reads carefully, who rereads, who takes notes, a student who journals, who participates in discussion, who explores ideas surrounding a topic, a student who outlines, who drafts, right, who drafts early and frequently, and then a student who's critical and who is consistently revising their work. Those are the students, those are the qualities that we see in successful students across the board. So for in our composition classroom, we might choose to prioritize these things. So frequent, careful, and active reading, journaling, active discussion, thesis exploration, outlining and drafting, revision, editing, and proofreading. If those are what a strong writer typically needs to do, or a successful composition student or successful writer needs to do, then we can make sure that we have assignments, backwards design assignments, that cross those qualities off of the list, or that allow students to meet those standards. The problem with traditional grading methods is often that if we have, let's say, five assignments that lead up to a major paper, and those 5 assignments are in a category that's worth 20% of their overall grade, and the essay is in a category that's worth 80% of their overall grade, the student looks at that model and says, it'd be really easy for me to skip all of this and just do the paper. Let me just get to the product. Let me just write it. Whereas in this model, because each of these things is a requirement of the contract that they need to go through the process of doing those Unit 1 assignments. They need to do the metacognitive awareness reading guide to make sure that they're reading carefully and fluently. They need to do an ETA sheet, which is explaining, taking a stand, and applying ideas from that reading. They need to journal in class and post those journals and discuss those ideas in class. They need to be there and participate in discussions around the reading and around the ideas that they're writing on. They need to draft a provisional thesis, create a basic outline, draft, conference. Right? All of those things become necessary components of the contract. And so that contracted grade of a B is dependent on them completing all of the tasks. And it's not because as instructors we want to make students jump through hoops, although that's a lot of times the way it's interpreted. What we want is we want them to understand that in order to be successful, you first need to go through this process. And so when we begin thinking about our grading contract, we need to think about what constitutes labor in our class. So do we want to prioritize specific things, specific ideas? We want to think about how students are going to earn the default grade. We want to think about the course learning outcomes, which is why we're all here. Asao Inoue, who is the father of labor-based grading in many ways, talks about motivation, and specifically he gives the example of when you go to take a ceramics class, or if you take a yoga class, or if you enroll in exercise class, right? And your goal is to become proficient in those things. And the labor that you do in ceramics, in exercise, in yoga is going to help you to become a better practitioner. You're going to be better at that thing by the time you finish the course. And so when we think about our students, we want them to be better writers. And so what is it that they need to do? If you're in a yoga class, that might be that you're working on fundamentals, right? If you're in a fitness class, you're going to be building strength. In a ceramics class, you're going to be doing whatever it is you would need to do in a ceramics class. But you would have an opportunity for success because of your participation in those activities. And so this is an excerpt from one of my grading contracts for English 103. So, and I want to just highlight a couple of these that I use the contract as the first step in a conversation. I want to make sure that I'm emphasizing skills that help them to become better writers. I talk about why that's important. And then I talk about what I think is going to be important, what skills I think are important to attain that goal. And so we have a conversation about what types of labor you need to engage in order to be a writer. And that self-reflection, that reflective activity helps them to see the motivation behind the instructor's decisions to include in the contract, and how that leads to the default grade of a B. We also talk about why a default grade of a B. And so kind of a more visual example of that, and one that I think students find very, very helpful, is this one. So kind of going through the narrative surrounding labor-based grading, I tell them that they're going to be able to figure out what their grade is at the course at any point based upon this chart. And so I think it's important for students to participate regularly. I think it's important for students to turn assignments in on time, to not ignore any of the assignments, right? And that there are additional opportunities to move your grade, right? That those are the things that I'm going to prioritize in my composition classroom. And so considering that, I give students a default 5 days of missed class in a 2-day-a-week English 103 course. And a lot of people will say, well, that's really generous. But the reason I have it at 5 is because it corresponds with OCC's administrative withdrawal period. That if you miss 2 consecutive weeks of class, that you are no longer, that you would receive a grade of an X and not get credit for the course. And so I say that you can't have more than 5, and that really at 5, you've missed 2 weeks of the class, and it's important for you to be here, and it's important for you to be a part of our conversation. If you begin missing more than that, right? If you miss 3 weeks of class, the highest you can get, no matter what you do on the other side of the chart, is going to be a C, right? More than that, and it's really going to be difficult for you to complete the course successfully. But what really ends up happening is the next few columns. So late assignments, I give them within 48 hours of the due date for late assignments. And they can have up to 5 late assignments. So they have a window of five different assignments that they can turn in within 48 hours of the due date. I've actually changed this in the missed assignments. I've changed in the most recent iteration of this contract to be 1 week past the due date without an extension. And that's really helped me. But students realize, if they're at 4 late assignments, and they can check that on their own on Blackboard, if they are at 4 late assignments, that they really need to prioritize their timely submission of assignments. That, missed assignments, that you can't just not do an assignment. You can't skip or ignore, because once you're 1 week, and that's why I changed it to a week, once you're the due date of the assignment, it becomes exponentially harder to complete that assignment, because now you have new material that you're responsible for on top of what you've already missed. Same thing with ignored assignments. If you've ignored assignments, there's going to be gaps in your understanding about concepts. It's going to be very difficult for you to complete the course if you've ignored assignments. And as a matter of fact, there's no way to achieve a grade above a C- if you've ignored any of the assignments in the class. And then once you've fulfilled this, once you've met that contracted grade of a B, if you want to do additional assignments for a grade bump, those are outlined as well. And I've done all kinds of things for additional assignments. I've allowed them to use texts for papers, write précis about related readings, do a quick presentation to the class. I offered that. No one's taken advantage of it yet. Presentation to the class about something that they found compelling or interesting related to the reading. And so those additional assignments are consistent, but they also are reflective of what a student who would be successful in the course anyway would probably do on her or his own. My experiences with labor-based grading practices are that I have better, more productive conversations with students. I had a student, my favorite example I think of this is I was teaching thesis statements and essay organization around a thesis statement. I was up at the board and I was kind of writing a sample outline and talking about text that we had read, and a student raised his hand and he said, excuse me, mister, I don't understand what you're doing up there. This isn't really helping. Can you explain it in a different way? And I paused and I thought it was so interesting, because it's not a response you typically hear from students. And what I think that that's indicative of is honesty and a trust in my role as somebody to help them meet the expectations of the class, not as somebody who's going to be evaluating the extent to which they understand based on my instruction. And I would hope that a student would feel comfortable raising his hand to say that this isn't making sense to me. Can you explain it in a different way? Or can you elaborate on that idea differently? Or can you give me another example? Or can you say that in a simpler way? You would hope that that would happen, and it almost never does. And so those meaningful discussions about course content and why it is that we're doing things become helpful. Students also, I think, are more honest with where they stand in the course. They see the assignments, they want to make sure that they have all the due dates because they're responsible for a contract that they helped to create. I've seen more consistent attendance because I've prioritized attendance. And I've also allowed students the space to say, look, if you have something going on outside of class, you know you have a set number of days that you can miss class. Make sure that you manage those days. If you get close to them and you have extenuating circumstances, then maybe come and talk to me. But that's been the exception, not the rule. I haven't had students really go beyond, successful students go beyond those 5 days. I already mentioned honest conversations about the strategies that help and the strategies that don't. And I've also had better conference and office hour attendance. I do individual conferences on drafts in my class. And I found that students are more willing and more likely to come. They see the paper as a conversation and steps on a path more so than let me just submit a draft, you grade it, and then I'll see whether I want to redo it from there. Right, that the grade is going to become a lot less significant than my comments and my thoughts about how they're meeting the assignment, because that's going to determine whether they get the credit for that assignment or have to go back and work more to earn the labor that it constitutes. And so as you think about this, regardless of whether you adopt a fully labor-based model for grading or whether you begin to just question the way in which traditional grading frameworks function in your classroom, I think that it's important to think intentionally about how our practices and how our policies affect the way students experience our classes. If they're not afraid of the assessment process, and if that's been a stigma for them before, if they've been afraid of failure before, if they feel as though they have complete control over the entire process and that you're there to help them get through the process, then we've effectively eliminated one of the major stumbling blocks for student retention, for student success, for program completion, for graduation. And so I think that labor-based grading communicates our values as educators in a way that students can understand, even if they're first-generation college students, or even if they're students who come from backgrounds that don't traditionally prioritize education. And so hopefully this has given you some food for thought. If you have questions, feel free to send me an email. And I have posted a series of readings that relate to labor-based grading, specifically Asao Inoue's work on labor-based grading underneath this presentation. So you feel free to click on any of those and explore some of that content. Thank you all so much for your time and attention, and I will talk to you soon.